The mortar attacks that night started early in the morning, about 2 in the morning. And normally on a normal mortar attack, we'd get mortared for about 10 minutes. We'd get the ships airborne and get them to stop. And that was all they mortared us that night. But that night, about an hour later, they mortared us again. And about an hour later, they mortared us again. And then somebody made an announcement. I don't know how they went around and said, hey, something's different about this mortar attack. Um, and then we had an aircraft based in our base that it was a glider with a side looking radar and some kind of sensing device that sensed urine. And they called the tower and said, we are painting a picture of multiple people moving towards your base. And so all of a sudden we thought, holy crap, there's a whole bunch of combat soldiers up there advancing towards us. And we were concerned about getting overrun. Because by then we heard that some of the other bases, Vin Long and Can Tho, had been overrun and they had killed some key leaders on those bases. They had maps showing where the officers lived and they went and killed them. And so our commander decided to spread the helicopters around the base so that they weren't all in the same place. And then that night, he started making us sleep under the helicopter at night. So we flew it during the day on missions, fueled it up, took it back out to the perimeter, and then slept underneath it. That's what I remember about the start. I do remember we were going into the town of Mito uh, for some kind of reason to deliver somebody who was going to an important meeting, and they were shooting at us from the rooftops. The morning after Tet, when we were out on the perimeter, they were dropping bombs right off the end of our runway. F-100s and were dropping bombs right off, which told us, and then we heard that the town of Sok Trang had gotten overrun by Viet Cong. I remember that morning waking up, and my friend was kind of a photographer nut, and he was taking a picture where they were dropping the bombs, and we heard this kind of sound, and so some sniper, and I said to Mike, "Are you rewinding your camera or something?" And he said, "No." He says, "That's somebody shooting at us." So the bullets were going over our head, and they were close enough that we could hear them. And so
Wow.
that's what I remember about that part of Tet. We did combat assaults on Canto and Vin Long. We're doing combat assaults with troops going in to the bases we used to fly into to take them back. That was a real striking experience from, here we are getting shot at from people inside our own bases. They had gotten inside the bases and were around the perimeter. And when we came in with helicopters, they shot at us. They gradually took back their perimeters in a few days, but I remember that being an experience we had. The role of the combat soldier is to kill the enemy under certain situations, okay? Early on, I became a pilot for a Vietnamese general. And one time in the helicopter, and he said, this, this whole area of people, and there were thousands of people below us, is real sympathetic to the Viet Cong. So this is a free fire zone. You can shoot anything that's moving. And I thought to myself, I'm in the front seat of the helicopter. I thought, that's not right. We're not doing that. Okay. So my crew was kind of waiting for me to say, because some people got pretty trigger happy. They wanted to, if somebody told them, that's all the authority we needed was the province chief's authority to say this is a free fire zone. They normally didn't say it unless it was a really bad area with obvious combat troops and everything, but that wasn't the context here. Why I can live with what I had to do and why was that I, I, I just said to my crew over the intercom, we're not firing our weapons. And he didn't make any big deal about it. So I just figured it was a passing comment he made. Um, if he had given me a direct order, I want you to roll in on those troops, I'd probably said, sir, with all due respect, I'm not going to do that. We have these rules in our company about engagement, and that's what we follow.
So this Vietnamese general says we're flying over free fire zone. And
Right,
so if you see, someone on the ground, you can open fire if you want.
right,
And you say we're not going to do that. And then you say, we're going to follow the rules that we abide by. So
right.
what were those rules?
Those rules were if you're in a transport helicopter, you don't fire unless you're fired upon first. Okay? Unless you're given an order on a combat assault to use suppressive fire on the way in there. In other words, if they know it's a hot area, and then you tell your door gunners, call out the fire you're seeing, and then you make the decision about firing back. I don't want you to be waiting for me to say fire back. And that happened on a lot of combat assaults. Okay. Now, if you're resupplying an outpost and you're going in there, you don't go in with guns blazing. But as soon as if you get a hit, like somebody shoots and the bullet goes through the helicopter, then you authorize you say, well, turn loose or give it back to them. And then they go, okay. Or they turn up to you and say, Mr. McCarthy, can we fire? I see flashes down there and I think they're shooting at us. And I'd say, yes, you can return fire. Okay. So it was returning fire. Or if you're in a combat assault and in the gunships, you do reconnaissance by fire. In other words, you might go into an area that's been a hot area and you would shoot it up to see if you could get them to shoot at you first, so that when the transports come in, they're not just making shredded wheat out of them, but you've taken the opportunity to invite them to shoot at you first. So you kind of know where they are and what they're doing. If I'm in a mortar attack and I open the door and it blows up in front of me, some way I'm going to find the strength to still go out and start that helicopter. Okay, I'm not getting under the bed or in a bunker or something. That's just the job I took on.
Right. So you're referring to the where you're based. If that's the right word. Mortar attacks come in, and for
Yeah,
at least part of your tour, your job when the mortar attack comes is to get in the helo and go find those mortars and take them
right,
out.
right. And that happened. That would happen a couple times a week. They'd lob mortars in. So
And I just want to ask you about that. So let's say it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Mortars
yeah,
come in.
yeah,
You see soldiers scrambling for cover.
yeah,
You instead, with your crew, are heading to the helo.
right.
And so, what I'm interested in is what's going on in your mind. Is when that happens, is this just sort of this situation where, as I've heard so many times, just the training kicks in a way your mind shuts down, you kind of become an automaton in a way, and you just, the adrenaline's going, and
Yeah,
you just deal with this mission, and you're not thinking about you're not thinking anything other than what's it going to take to accomplish this mission, which in this case is to get those mortars to quit firing on the base.
Right.
Is that kind of the process? You kind of become an automaton in a way and just do it?
Well, I don't remember becoming an automaton, but you have to you have to have thought out what you're going to do. You in that running out there, obviously if something blows up, you don't go right that second, but then you think, well, okay, you got an aircraft to get to. It's about 50 yards away. You got to get on a flak jacket. You got get in the aircraft. The aircraft's already combat cocked. That means I've gone through the whole procedure, and all I have to do is jump in, flip the switches on, pull the trigger, start the turbine running. The crew chiefs all have a defined job. They pull out the armament pieces alongside of you. Um, they are checking everything out as the rotor starts spinning. It only takes about a minute to get up to 66 RPM, and then you're just pulling ass balls to the wall to get that thing out of the revetment and out on the runway and get it taken off. And then you are asking the tower if they can see where the flashes are coming from, and you're looking for the flashes, and then you start rolling in, and then they quit pretty quick. After you do a few of those, um, you actually become a little bit numb to how dangerous it is, and you're just trying to get to the aircraft and get it airborne and take care of business. I'm 60% disabled. I got moderate to severe damage in my neck and my back, and my back's bolted together with plates and screws, and I have peripheral neuropathy in my legs and radiculopathy and that kind of junk.
Are the physical challenges you just mentioned, are they related to your time in Vietnam?
Yeah, I think I think the peripheral neuropathy and the radiculopathy are related to spraying Agent Orange myself. I'm in the Agent Orange registry. Um, I don't know that for sure, but the 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 VA thinks there's a relationship there. And my back, I think my back wasn't necessary. I did go through two engine failures and sort of semi crashes, not really, but it was the probably the pounding of the blades
Yeah.
every day.
Let me ask you about the Agent Orange, because you know, among your jobs was, if I remember right, to escort helos that were spraying Agent Orange. Is that right?
That's right. And what I would do is I would fly behind them or adjacent with them while they were doing a mission. And then sometimes when we got done, there was a sticky stuff which was on the helicopter, and they'd wash it off.
So we all know, looking back, we all know the enduring costs of Agent Orange. Um, but explain to folks, who don't know about this. At the time, I've heard veterans say, I'm there and Agent Orange is just kind of raining down on us. And we didn't really think I mean, other than that was unpleasant. We didn't really think anything of it. Um, so, again, looking back on the Agent Orange, we think, oh, this is an unfolding disaster that's, decades later, we'll still be paying for this. But at the time, when you're in that helo and you're escorting the helo that's spraying the Agent Orange, what does all of that mean to you at the time, not knowing what's coming?
I don't remember losing any sleep over it at the time. It was just the job that needed to be done at the time. You get pretty tolerant to doing things that probably jeopardize something later on in your life that but you didn't think about it because there were more important things like saving people's lives or bailing them out of bad situations. So,
Yeah.
um,
What was the
you
point
know,
of, just
go ahead.
for folks who don't know, what was the point of using Agent Orange?
Well, in the missions that I flew out on Dong Duong Island, um, it was to defoliate a road that the people who were working on the island, on one end of the island, there was a beacon that radar vectored B-52 bombers into Vietnam. And at the other end, there was a little base. And the people who were going to maintain that were plinked at, shot at by soldiers out there that happened to be Viet Cong on the island. And so they wanted to clear the road so it wasn't as dangerous to drive up and down it.
You mentioned the Viet Cong, and my impression from what you've written, Viet Cong is primarily or completely what you were dealing with. Did you also have some NVA down there?
Down in the south end of Vietnam, I think we did almost exclusively dealt with Viet Cong.
Oh,
We might have gotten a few NVA, and I'm sure we did during the Tet Offensive of '68, because they came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to bolster everybody. They were really trying to turn the war right then because they'd done it at Dien Bien Phu in '54 with the French. And the French, when Dien Bien Phu, the French lost 8,000 people and the Vietnamese Viet Minh lost 24,000, but they won and they got the French out of Vietnam.
sure.
So I think they thought if we can overrun every town and every airfield with Tet, maybe we can swing this war.
In your memoir, you write about the orphanage, and not only are you visiting the orphanage and interacting with folks at the orphanage, but also folks from the States are sending things to you to share with the kids at the orphanage, um, to encourage, I'm assuming in your mind, to encourage the sisters who are working with these orphans day after day. And my question is, before you went to Vietnam, you were in seminary considering becoming a priest, and so you're in that seminary world. Now you're interacting with Catholic nuns who are working in this orphanage. As you're doing this in your own mind, is that work that, I don't know if it's work, but what you're doing at the orphanage, the activities at the orphanage, is that in your mind just kind of an extension of what you were doing in the seminary? Or was that also in your mind sort of a contribution to the hearts and minds idea that ultimately the way we win this war in South Vietnam is by winning the hearts and the minds of the people? When you are going to that orphanage and interacting, what's most in your mind? Is this Catholic charity primarily? Is it hearts and minds? Is it a combination of the two?
Well, as you know, in the military, each unit's different. I had a commanding officer who was a pretty perceptive guy and he did his homework. So he, it was no accident that I ended up in civic actions, um, being an assistant civic actions officer, because he had read about my background. And he said, hey, and they ended up rolling quite a few responsibilities to me along the way, but one of them was working with a captain who was actually what we called the real live officer charged with civic actions. And the civic action program went back years before, where a doctor who'd been in Soc Trang set up the first relationships with the hospital, the orphanage, and the Chu Hoi Center. But he started the civic actions program, and our commander, he had done his homework and understood that the civic action program was an important part of winning the hearts and minds of the people. And he said, he brought me in and said, you got a background in this area more so than other people in our unit. Would you take over this? And in fact, ended up being the primary mover behind that because the captain was the operations officer too. He was busy deciding the schedule of who flies what every day and all that. My job would be to go around the base and get extra food, extra clothing, extra things that I could. And then I started writing my mother and the guys I knew back in the seminary, and they put together shipments of clothing and things like that. I thought the work was noble because we were in the John Wayne part of the war, the early years of the war. I thought we were trying to help these people in Vietnam to have a democracy or whatever. And I thought that was worthwhile. And I thought if something happens to me, and most people figure out the odds are almost stacked against you in that job, at least I'm doing something noble. It's worthwhile.